All right. Hey, everybody. My name is Jeremy. I'm a software engineer, founder of 7-Factor Software. I've got with me today Meredith Turney. Why don't you introduce yourself, Meredith, real quick?
Everyone, I'm Meredith Turney. I'm a conscious leadership coach, and I help leaders build strong teams, especially like in a hybrid remote setting, which is very popular, very timely topic right now. But I really help people step into their capacity as a leader and build strong teams.
Fantastic. And you're probably wondering why we're together. Those of you who know a little bit about me and my company know that we're very much about building conscious human-centric teams. And the company itself is very oriented towards finding people who want to be a part of a human-centric team. And so we decided today, let's get together and let's have a conversation about conscious leadership and generally what's wrong with grind culture in startups and how conscious leaders can work against it. All right. So first, Meredith, why don't you tell us a little bit about what conscious leadership is? It's kind of a complex set of words there.
Yeah, well, I'm sure everyone has probably experienced what I call the old paradigm of leadership, which was very much command and control, very top down, hierarchical. And a lot of it was very much characterized by being aggressive, ruthless, really driven by profit or success at any cost. I think all of us have witnessed that or experienced it at some place in our career. Well, that kind of leadership works in the short term, but it really comes at a cost, and it can really eat away at your soul. And it has a negative impact also on the other stakeholders, which is your team members, your employees, your company, your customers, your clients, your communities. So conscious leadership is really a completely different kind of leadership. It's about developing yourself and becoming more aware of your potential as a human and a leader. I mean, if you think about the term conscious, it really means to be awake or thoughtful or intentional. And I like to use the example of John Mackey, who's the Whole Foods of CEO. He actually wrote a book about it called Conscious Leadership.
Yeah.
And he talks about that, about his journey as a conscious leader. And he defines it as an inner journey of character development and personal transformation. And it's informed by a powerful understanding of human nature and human culture. And the reason that I'm really into conscious leadership is because some people think, well, okay, I just want to know about the bottom line. Like, how is this really going to help my company? But you've probably heard, Jeremy, that the axiom about in order to grow the company, you have to grow the leader. And John Maxwell talks about that law of the lid. And so that's what conscious leadership is about. It's about becoming more, it's about a deliberately developmental journey, about you becoming more fully human and being more conscious of who you are and the impact that you have. And so as a conscious leadership coach, it's my honor to help my clients increase their consciousness or their awareness about their potential and their impact.
All right, great, wonderful definition. Let's talk about grind culture, because I think that grind culture is an area where some toxic leadership traits have just infused themselves and kind of fused themselves almost to the DNA of being a startup, right? When I say grind culture, what I'm talking about is if you're not grinding, you're losing. If you're not working every single weekend and, forget about your family, nothing matters. The only thing matters is chasing the billion-dollar unicorn dream. If you're not doing that, then you're not a good founder, in air quotes. So what do you think about grind culture and how can conscious leadership solve this problem?
Yeah, it's such an important topic, Jeremy, because I mean, we've seen this as a result of the pandemic. Burnout has been a huge topic, and burnout is a result of something like a grind culture and just so many things that are going on right now. I am a huge fan of vocabulary. Ever since I was a kid, I have loved studying vocabulary. And so, and also as a coach, it's really important to me when I'm working with my clients and they use a word, I want to know, what do you mean by that word? Because I think I might have a different definitions. I love vocabulary. So I actually went and I looked up, what is the definition of grind? And the actual definition of grind is to rub harshly or grate. There's a second definition, which, as you know, a lot of words, depending on their context, have a different definition. The other meaning is to torment, oppress, or crush. And when you think about it, that's not really the word I want to use to describe the way I work. What do you think about that?
Yeah. I hadn't really thought of it that way. And really, if you break it down to what a lot of founders do is they do grind themselves to dust. And having built a company myself and seen a lot of the adversity and difficulty of going from like the very first initial stages of it's just you, your hands are everywhere, you're doing everything, you're designing the product, you're pushing everything forward, to now sitting at, over 55 employees, where we have delegation chains and leaders that are, owning portions of my business. I can see why people get into this position where burnout is just what happens. I actually burned out about a year and a half ago. And my burnout wasn't precisely the same kind of burnout that you see in a lot of startup owners where they are working 90 hours a week, because I haven't. I've never ground, if you will, myself to dust when starting this company. But certainly for me, it was more of an emotional, overwhelming and just burning out due to the fact that there's so much going on and so much pressure on me to make sure that I'm making the right decisions and driving the company forward, that it just kind of, put me in a position to where emotionally I couldn't feel anything. But I definitely see a lot of startup folks just making this huge mistake and just being proud of it. And you don't have to be proud of grinding yourself to dust. You don't have to do that, right? At least I don't think that you do. There's a lot of venture capitalists out there that would agree with me too. And there's a lot of companies that were built using good methods and that were built using sustainable methods that didn't require people to grind themselves to dust. So for sure, I don't think it's a requirement to build a good company. It's just toxic.
Yeah. And you used a really interesting word right there, sustainable. I actually have you heard about this concept, regenerative agriculture?
Yes, actually, I have. But why don't you explain it? That's awesome.
Yeah. So I just heard this term the other day and it struck me. I was like, regenerative. Okay. So it's basically how to do the soil and how we grow food. But the key terms to describe it are conservation, rehabilitation for things that are being or have been depleted, and resilience. And to regenerate is to recreate, reconstitute, or to make over. Again, I'm getting to my vocabulary nerdish here, but it's to make over, and especially to make it something into a better form or a better condition. And that really struck me. And I thought, I think we need regenerative work. I think we need, like, that to me is almost like the opposite of the grind culture. It's how we make work regenerative, where it's not just like you give your work and then you get compensation back. How could we look at it more holistically, where people get something more than just this grind for the money or for the prestige? What if it was something more than that? So that really struck me when I saw that word the other day.
So what about some practical steps? Like, how can I become a more conscious leader?
Yeah. So obviously I recommend working with a coach and also really focusing on your team building. And so one of the things that I like to do when I work with leaders is do an assessment on where you at right now. And let's see, where are some areas where you can raise your consciousness, your awareness about how you're showing up as a leader. How are you affecting your team? How are you affecting all the stakeholders around you? And also for your team, do the same for them. What are their values? What do they want to get out of this? Do they understand the vision for the company? If not, that needs to be communicated very clearly to them. So I would say, as a conscious leader, if you're interested in this work, do an assessment, figure out where you're at right now, get a good benchmark, start working on it, on your professional development and your awareness of yourself, and then really start helping your team develop that as well. And I think as a result, you're going to grow the leader, you're going to grow the company, you're going to grow the team, and you're going to have a more conscious company.
Can't deny the advantages of having people that like to work together. It's one of those things that we take for granted.
Well, I always say that conscious leaders are gardeners, because you really have to keep cultivating and growing. And so I'm curious, when you think about yourself as a gardener, like in the garden, how do you translate being a gardener into what you're doing with your company and being a leader?
So gardening and building a company are very similar. Actually, building software and gardening are quite similar in that it is an organic process. You're growing something from the ground up, right? You're starting with just bare earth, and you're, seeding that with ideas, and you're seeding that with people and relationships, and you're creating a system that builds a piece of software. And, something as silly as an iPhone app that, Fruit Ninja or any of those kind of little silly games that you play on these various platforms, all require the same type of operation, where you start with nothing and you grow it as you move forward. And part of the growth there is investing in the people, trusting them to build the right thing, trusting them to move into the appropriate space when they need to solve that problem, or when they need to go and talk to this person to get, their application deployed, like figuring out that system so that everybody can talk to one another. And at the out the other end of it, you get something tangible and useful. So it's just like gardening in many ways, in that you're tilling the soil, you're spending time, you're adding the appropriate fertilizer and soil addendums, and you're doing all of the things to make sure that this plant can eventually turn into something that bears fruit that you then hopefully get to partake in, which is a whole lot of fun. So gardening is very similar. And I would also argue, and where you're probably going with this, is it's very similar to growing an organization, irrespective of if it's a software organization or really anything, because you have to be able to give back to one another and to water each other and to sort of organically create an organization where everybody likes to talk to one another, and everybody enjoys, this whole generative culture idea where we're innovative. And I come up with an idea and I'm like, hey, what do you think about this? And you're like, oh, that's really cool. And then you kind of build this nice little internal feedback loop. And all of a sudden you have the next big idea that gets pushed out the product pipeline. So I think that there's a lot of, there's a huge analogy towards gardening, growing, and growing a company and building software. It's all very analogous.
Absolutely. And as you're talking, I think that is crossing my mind is this is the topic, the grind culture. This is the opposite. This is like the cure for it. We have to keep cultivating, because, if you deplete the soil and you grind it down, you're not going to be able to grow anything there. It's burned earth. Like you cannot do that. And so we have to keep cultivating. We have to keep making sure that we are growing as conscious leaders. And also our team, are we cultivating them? Are we growing them? That's something I work a lot with leaders about. How are you growing your team? How are you cultivating that talent? And it's so important. And also we have to put those guardrails so that people don't have that mentality of I got to grind. Usually there's something behind that. And so I always ask people, why do you feel like you need to grind? Is it because you're motivated by materialism, like money or prestige? Like, what is it that's motivating you? Let's get down to the essentials. What are your values? What do you really want out of this? And bring it to their consciousness, their awareness. And let's work towards that in a way that's balanced, so you're not grinding down to nothing.
I love that. And I think, as you said, I think grind culture, the worst part about it is it hurts everybody around you. You may be profiting from it. And everybody said when I started my company that nobody is going to care more about your success than you. And while I see that early on and it makes sense, if you aren't able to get people to care about the success of your company a couple of years down the line, I think you failed pretty hardcore at building a culture and building a company that's going to be successful. And grind culture hurts that early on. If I am like compulsively obsessed over making sure that my people are working, at all costs, and using sort of some of the toxic reasons like, well, we won't succeed if you don't do this, or, we're going to fail and I'm not going to be able to pay you and all your options are worthless if you don't do this. Like, those are psychological manipulation techniques that people may be doing them, but not knowing what they're hurting. Or there are other people that may be doing them and need to be told to stop because they're toxic. But at the end of the day, you have to focus on building and cultivating those around you and not just the grind, not just attacking. Now, I do have to say, there are times when you're in the middle of a rush and you have a timeline. Maybe the huge venture capital bid is on the line, or maybe if you don't win this particular contract, you're pretty much going to have to hang it up. Yeah, there are times where you might need to push a little bit, put the pedal to the metal and focus on it. But you should build the right relationships first. And you should build a cultivating culture first before you have to pull the trigger on those kinds of operations, because that is what's going to keep your team intact when you run into adversity.
Absolutely. And I do think that conscious leadership is an invitation to do things differently. Like what you're describing, it's not sustainable. It's not regenerative. So how can we do something? How can we recreate how we work? And I think with technology and the paradigm shift we've seen through the last 3 years, I think that we can create a new way of working and relating to each other that's much healthier. and to use our word that we're using today, regenerative. And I think we really can do that as long as we're willing to lean into conscious leadership and really start focusing on developing ourselves as conscious leaders.
Thank you so much, Meredith. This has been awesome. Appreciate the conversation. Stay tuned for more conversations like this.